I want to talk to you about something I really love. I really, really love 1959. Now you might think, well, why would somebody love a year? 1959. Well, I like 1957. I like 1958 too. But man, 1959, that was an awesome year. I would love to go back and live 1959 all over again. I was 11 years old, and life was wonderful. My life was happy. It was exciting to be alive. I saw huge possibilities. I thought I could take on the whole world. Man, everything seemed to be going just wonderful. I look at the cars. I've tried for years to find a 1959 Cadillac that I could lovingly put back together and restore and drive. Oh man, those were automobiles. I just about had one time. Somebody sneaked along and came along and snatched it up before I could get there. I had two sitting side by side in the garage in Iowa. I was bidding on them. Already had the parts I needed to make them complete. Found them in an automobile cemetery. Boy, would that have been cool. 1959. That was some year. Everything was good about 1959. Well, that was at least what I felt like when I was 11. I lived through 1959. But as I grew a little older, I realized that my view of the world that I held in 1959 wasn't complete. 1959 wasn't as happy for a lot of people as it had been for me in my youth. Even the cars weren't as good as I imagined them to be. They use a lot better steel in cars today. You know, those old 59s rusted out so bad, it was hard to keep replacement parts, kept patching up the rust spots. Those big high fins and fantastic rocket flame tail lights were exciting, but none of the cars had seat belts, let alone airbags. When it came time to stop that gigantic big car, all it had was drum brakes, not disc brakes. Oh, they had wonderful suspension. I remember my grandpa had 57 Packard, one of the last years Packard actually produced car. And it had an air ride suspension, so when you loaded the trunk real heavy and it would tip, the suspension down, it would automatically come up and level off so that it would stay straight on the highway. 59 Cadillacs had the same thing. Airbag suspension. Oh, they rode so nice. But man, they burned up gasoline. You see, what I'm trying to tell you is, if you set a goal in your mind of some place or something that you think is ideal, be very careful, because it is just your imagination. It was my imagination that believed that the world was beautiful in 1959, not reality. Reality was, there were a lot of people who lived right in my neighborhood who were miserable in 1959. That made life almost impossible in 1959. When I finally grew old enough and I realized what was going on in the world around me, I found out I was only seeing a tiny little bit of what I thought was the world. Within just a few months, we were going to have a president elected to serve this country as President of the United States that believed differently than I did when he went to church. He was Catholic. My dad thought the end of the world was going to happen. He really was afraid when John F. Kennedy was elected president. People had different beliefs. It wasn't the same as what we had grown up with. The world was wider, more broad, the spectrum of colors of possibilities were immense. In 1959, I only saw myself. It was sort of a selfish look at the view of the world. When I went to college, I ended up on the same floor in a dormitory with a young man who, 1959, was a black student in deep Mississippi school system. 59 was not a great year for him. 59 for a young man in the Deep South was a terrible, frightening experience. Even in 1966, when I went to school in college, he still was put in a single floor where all the black students were housed, still segregated in the northern Ohio state. In a college university setting, he was still put on one floor where all of the black students had to live. Still segregated. 1966. Right there on the same floor, I got my room too. I learned a lot about that. I got to actually hang out with one of the guys that had grown up in Jordan. He lived in Bethlehem when we came to school together in 1966. He was Arabic in his family, his cultural heritage. He was Catholic in his faith. He was French in his linguistics as well as Arabic. 1959 had not been a good year for him. 1967 was even worse. After the Six-Day War, he was suddenly, without having moved a single inch, he was now a citizen of Israel and not of Jordan. Bethlehem became a part of the Israel territory. And I learned during those years that there will never be peace in Israel, in that territory, in my lifetime. Taught simple lessons that I wouldn't have learned had I not been exposed to the wider world around me. Now, I talk to you about this for one very important reason. I hear people say, wouldn't it be great if we could just go back to where, if we just had this ideal life like we had back when I was growing up, when everybody got to put their hand on their heart and pledge allegiance to the United States flag every morning and have a worshipful prayer at the beginning of each school day. Wouldn't that be great just to go back to that simple life where everybody believed the same thing? Everybody believed that everything was good if we just did the same things we could do back in those days? I'm glad you had a happy time in your life. When you had something that caused you to feel joy, to feel love, to feel a part of something. But believe me when I tell you, there were people just outside the focus of your life that weren't having a great time, no matter what time you put that in. There were people who spoke prayers in their Catholic faith that didn't sound like the prayers that you heard expressed each morning at the start of class. And one day, a very wonderful Christian believer, follower of Jesus Christ, who was a lawyer, who taught me about things, about the way our country's put together. His name was Bob Walker. He was a judge, Findlay, Ohio. He was a professor of law in my college. And he told me that when it comes to law, it's all about fairness, about evenness, equality, uniformity. You see, if we want to go back to an ideal time, we'd have to go back to a time that allowed prayer in schools at every morning beginning of class, that would include Catholic priests invoking the name of Mary, the mother of Jesus. I have tremendous respect for Mary. I actually treasure her more now than I did when I was growing up and I heard all the stories of Jesus' birth. What she endured, what she went through, her life testimony is incredible. But I still don't pray the same prayers that my Catholic brothers do. If the law is applied evenly, if the law is applied uniformly as it was designed to do, we'd have to accept speakers from the Baha'i faith and Hindu leaders have Hindu prayers, and Islamic leaders pray Islamic prayers to Allah. If we were going to have an enforced prayer at the beginning of every day, the law simply requires that we give everybody a chance to have their prayer too. We ignored a bunch of those rules back in 1959, but you can't ignore them now. We've gotten too diverse. We've had a growing up process that our country has gone through. Now we have to look at things a little differently. We have to look at people's experiences who don't look the same as ours. Is it fair that all the black students had to stay on one floor of one dormitory? No, that isn't fair. And so gradually, over several years, they applied the rules of fairness, equality, acceptance to the black students as well as the white. That was a good move. The same is true with many of the things that we see today. Our big political discussions, our big thing, even within our churches. If we could just go back to the way it was, like when Pastor, and we all have a favorite, Pastor, you fill in the name of the pastor that you want. and the church that you felt most comfortable with. If we could just go back to those days, if we could just recapture what it was like to be the church of, well, for me, 1959. I thought church 1959 was awesome. It seemed to revolve around me. It was Bible school for me. It was Sunday school for me. It was youth group for me. It was games and fun and inclusive. But it wasn't for everybody. It was just for me. It was that time in my life. Now, I realize that most of the work that was going on behind the scenes that I didn't see were done by people who didn't have a whole lot of stuff coming back to them. They saw their responsibility as taking care of kids like me. They were the givers. I was the receiver. Now I have to be the giver. You see, I grew up. You need to grow up. If you have placed a society picture in your mind, if you have placed a picture of what the world was like when you were young and innocent and uninitiated into the real world, if you want to go back to a time when Jesus Christ was just the God that you wanted and wanted to feel comfortable with, get real. Get in the Bible. Get in the Word. When the Apostle Paul went into Ephesus, it was a world filled with people who were immoral and sexually promiscuous. It wasn't the ideal world, but he had a job to do. If you want to see what problems are in the church, and I was just reading an article here today about how the church is declining. It's got all kinds of internal conflicts. It's got, little things going on between. Just read the letters to Paul that he wrote to Corinth. It was no different. We got a job to do. We got a Jesus Christ we have to speak about and testify to, and then put our actions behind our beliefs. Grow up. Get with the program. If Jesus would still be alive today, he would look at people who were regretting that the world was still 1959, was not still the same as they had in their innocence. And he would say the same thing to you, to me, that he said to his own disciples. Oh, you of little, weak, puny, penny-wasted faith. Grow up. I got work to do. What he said to Peter. If you love me, get to work. There are sheep that need to be taken care of. If you love me, get to work. There are lambs that are starving to death. Get out there and feed my lambs. Protect them. Take care of them. If you love me, Peter, I've got a job for you to do. Get with the program.